What's going on, guys? So today's video, I believe, is going to be extraordinarily helpful for those of you who've been looking for more information about RV frame flex. It's been going on all over YouTube. A lot of different folks have been saying that they have frame flex going on with their RV. I made a video about this a while back, and I told you I would dive in deeper to this topic to try to figure out what's really going on. And boy, have I learned a lot. Hang tight, I'll be right back. Okay, so first and foremost, I made a video a few weeks back talking about RV frame flex. And mainly what I talked about was, when the RV frame flexes beyond what it's supposed to, right? Because everything flexes. There's flex built into it. From an architectural perspective, from an engineering perspective, there's flex that's going to be inherent in almost any structure. That said, whenever you see movement beyond what you perceive those specifications should be, or what that normal flex is that something to be concerned about? And in many cases it is, but getting to the bottom of why this could be occurring was actually a lot more difficult than you might think, because there's so much more information that you have to gather about why it's happening, on what specific rigs it's happening, and if there's any chance that perhaps the RV owner might have some responsibility here, as well as perhaps an RV manufacturer or even the frame manufacturer. So we're going to dive into some of that, because following that previous video, I started hunting for more information. And you all probably know that I have contacts all throughout the RV industry. So I decided to reach out to the one who probably could answer the most questions for me. And that's one that you're probably also thinking should be involved in this conversation to some degree. That's going to be Lippert. So I reached out to Lippert. I reached out to my contacts, who were primarily social media contacts. These are content contacts. They're not necessarily, engineering contacts. Well, they put me in touch with the right people. I asked a ton of questions to those folks. They provided me answers, and I'm going to go over those answers with you today. All right, so I have a list of questions that I asked them and the answers that they provided me. And these answers came all the way up from an executive level at Lippert. So I'm not providing you just answers from, some employee who, checks the mailroom or does other tasks around Lippert. These are actually folks within the engineering division and higher up. So these are definitely people who would have the answers to the questions. So the first question I asked them is, why is RV frame flex occurring? And their answer to me was pretty simple. They said all frames are expected to flex. When there's excessive flex, it means some type of damage or defect has occurred in either the RV house attachment method or the frame structure, which has caused separation between the RV house and the frame structure. So what that means is that this sidewall right here, this section, or any other section really, but primarily the area we're talking about is this area right here, has come detached from the frame that's up here. So you have the upper deck, which is this area right here. You have the riser, which is right here, and then you have your main beams here. Your main beam right here has outriggers that come off of it, and that's what supports the floor and all of that. Up here is where your riser is, and it shoots out into the upper deck space. If somehow this part of the RV becomes detached from the frame, then you are now asking the frame to carry far more of the load than it was designed to carry by itself. And what I mean by that is the superstructure of the RV, or the house structure of the RV, coupled with the frame, create the superstructure. That's what creates the rigidity of the box. And that would be the case with any type of frame. So whether it's like a gooseneck trailer, right? A super heavy built gooseneck trailer, if you built a boxed section on top of the whole thing, there would be some flex still. What you do by creating this boxed section or the house on top of the frame, though, and attaching it to the frame, it stiffens everything up and creates a more rigid structure. And if any part of the house structure that the RV manufacturer builds, again, becomes detached from this structure of frame underneath it, that's where you start having problems. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. Let's say you had water damage, right? Let's say you flooded out the whole front of your RV somehow. Let's say roof damage. You had water that got into your roof and it worked its way down and got into your sidewalls and the floor structure. And perhaps whatever bonding method they used to connect this to the actual frame, along with bolts and screws and everything else. Let's just assume that some of that stuff is now broken loose from the frame because of damage that has occurred. Or let's just say you took your RV into a scenario where it just wasn't designed, or there was even a manufacturer related issue, whether it was a frame issue or a superstructure issue with the RV manufacturer. There was some type of an issue that caused this section to become detached from the upper deck frame portion. That is where you start getting excessive frame flex. That's where the frame flexes more than it should whenever it's attached to the walls. And you could probably imagine what happens when the box is no longer attached properly to the RV frame. Things move a lot, things break a lot. You couple that with any type of water damage, any type of structural related issues with the body of the RV itself, and that is essentially what they told me. So the next question was, are there specific types of fifth wheels that this primarily impacts? The answer was yes, a very small number of fifth wheels. We haven't seen or heard of any issues with either travel trailers or mid-profile fifth wheels. A mid-profile fifth wheel would tend to be a little bit lighter and not quite as tall. So whenever you see mid-profile fifth wheels, which arguably probably make up the vast majority of fifth wheels on the road, they haven't been experiencing any of these issues according to the folks over at Lippert. So travel trailers, mid-profile fifth wheels, they haven't seen any issues with. The excessive frame flex and wall movement appear to be largely occurring in less than 1/10 of 1% of full profile fifth wheels that have a GVWR over 17,000 pounds and are primarily being used as full-time residents by their owners. It also appears to be happening after extensive traveling and when there's a detachment of the RV house from the upper deck section of the RV frame. In some cases, owners who have experienced the issue are the second or third owners of the unit who purchased their units pre-owned and may not truly have a full understanding of the history of their RV. Now, this is absolutely probably one of the most important things to think about. I've really looked hard at a lot of the videos that people have directed me to see why RV flex may be occurring on certain units. And I can't specifically pinpoint exactly what's happening, but what I can do is go back into the past and look at some of their earlier videos and see that some of these folks who are actually having the issues purchased their unit secondhand, which there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with buying a used RV at all. However, you will not have, or potentially will not have, any clarity into why that owner actually sold the RV that they sold. What do I mean by that? Everybody wanting to get out of a product will come up with an excuse, whether it's legitimate or whether it's not, on why they're getting out of that product. And in some cases, I heard stories like, well, they just wanted to get out of RVing. So they have a unit that's less than a year old that probably cost them $150,000, and they're just getting out of it now. They don't even want the RV lifestyle anymore. They sell the RV, and then all of a sudden, oh, they got back into RVing again. They're back into it full steam. They spent a lot of money to get another RV. That just doesn't add up to me, honestly, the story there. Now, I'm not saying that the new owners, the ones who bought the unit pre-owned, are in the wrong at all, because they're under the assumption that the original owners just wanted to get out of RVing. So they bought a unit, lightly used, looked to be in really good shape. But then you start seeing some signs later in some of the videos, right? Some of the videos indicated major water damage that occurred. I think in one video, it was like a washer and dryer that was installed and it flooded out the upper deck of the unit. And that was interesting to me when I'd heard that a wet upper deck, a flooded out upper deck, is something that can damage the superstructure of your RV because it can get water into areas that can now become detached or delaminated. You know, when you own a home, if you have major flood damage, you have to panic. There's a lot of things that go into fixing that. You call a remediation company, you call a company who can come out and check humidity level, that can dehumidify everything, dry everything, use sensors and probes to check for water inside of boards to make sure that the water in those boards have been reduced to such a low percentage that it's not gonna risk rotting or other problems in the future. I don't think people do that with RVs. When people have floods in RVs, they dry out what they can see and then they just hope everything else kind of fixes itself, I think. Some folks, of course, will go the extra step, drop panels, look underneath things, see if everything is drained out completely. But if you don't take water damage that happens to your RV seriously, well, water's gonna stay in places that you don't see it. And just because you dry out an area does not mean that it didn't impact that area. So let's say you start developing frame flex because you get delamination or you get detachment of your structure. That water damage, that could have very likely rotted out your floor because the water just stayed there between the linoleum on top and the floor itself. That floor could be rotting out, especially after time goes by. You travel for a year, you travel for 2 years, that water is going to work its way through. Eventually, it will probably dry out. But think about how much damage that standing and sitting water could have on the structure of your RV, especially your floor. So now that you're starting to experience some type of frame flex because there's been some other detachment, you're starting to hear your floor cracking because it's now rotted because of the water that got into it. I also heard some cases where there was roof damage very early on in the ownership of a pre-owned RV. And again, I'm not placing blame on anybody because I don't know who originally could have caused that. I have no insight into that. But major roof damage where your roof membrane essentially comes off of the RV or is no longer attached to the RV itself can cause a lot of issues, especially if water gets into it. And in those same videos I saw, there was a lot of water damage to the roof itself. And then finally, one of the videos that I saw, which really stood out to me, was an issue with the sink not draining properly. And this was a big one for me because it seems like a simple problem, but as a second owner who bought the RV from, I guess, a couple who was getting out of RVing after owning it for such a short period of time, you would have thought at least during one of their trips, they would have ran their sink, the original owner, and they would have identified that the seal around their sink wasn't working properly, or at least during the PDI process when they bought their RV. But I would assume during one of the trips that they went on, they would have discovered that there was a seal problem with their sink and they would have fixed it. So the second owner, who's getting into what they believe is a perfect condition RV, would have a sink that isn't leaking. That's just my theory. I sure know that if I bought my unit pre-owned, the first trip we go out and we wash dishes, if there's water leaking on the floor, I'm going to call the previous owner and say, did you never use the sink in your RV? Because if you had, you would have discovered that the seal wasn't there and water was coming out. So that's a big one for me. Also, one of the other things that was an indication, something that just raised a red flag for me, was that one of the slide outs did not seat in properly. It was sticking out, according to the current owner, several inches on one side, and it was over compressing on the other side. Again, that's kind of a red flag for me, especially since that discovery occurred so soon into their RV ownership experience. So again, if I am a first owner buyer and I go to the dealership to pick up my brand new RV and they're getting it all ready, all the slide outs are in because I got to tow it, right? I'm not just going to leave the slides out when I'm towing it. And I do my PDI and I see a slide sticking out several inches on one side, but the other side all the way flush. I'm not going to leave that RV dealership lot until we figure out what the heck is going on with that slide and why it's in that condition. So again, I just find it kind of troubling to believe that a second owner who buys the RV from the first owner wouldn't have identified that problem as a second owner. The first owner should have absolutely identified that problem. They should have seen that problem and it should have been fixed, which leads me to believe that the problem could have occurred between the time period that it was sold to the second owner, sometime in that period. I'm not sure. But again, when I look at some of these videos and I start looking back, because that's what you all are telling me to do. You're telling me to go back and look at this YouTuber, look at this channel, look at this, and use my best judgment on why I think the problem is occurring and if there's some way to help them. Now, I do believe there are ways to help folks who are going through these problems, but without truly understanding what happened to the RV, what's going on with the RV, what scenarios you've drugged the RV too low, or you've dragged the back of your RV, or you've made contact with the bed rail on your truck because you took an angle too hard. You got to know all the facts. You can't just jump into helping someone saying, I don't know any facts, I don't care about the facts, I just care that you're going through a really tough time right now and I want to help you through it. You have to know what has actually happened to be able to actually fix some of these problems. So again, I do my research, I dig in deep, and I want to know all the facts. So I just wanted to bring that up because it definitely makes the point that when you're buying a pre-owned RV, you have to do the best research you can on what is going on with that RV, and that's a great reason to hire an inspector to go out and actually do a deep inspection of the RV, to check the roof, to check the slides, to check the seals, to check your water, to check everything, and to give you a full report on what they believe may be wrong with that unit you're considering spending your money on so you don't have a nightmare with it. Now, the next question is, many folks believe that Lippert uses imported steel. Is that true? So their answer to me was Lippert uses 100% domestic steel in their I-beams, tubing, and chassis structural components. Well, there's not really much more to add to that. If you thought that they used imported steel, well, according to this email I have, they use 100% domestic steel. So the next question is, do RV manufacturers have a set guideline on how their house structure should be built on top of the frame? And the answer is RV manufacturers design and attach walls and superstructure differently. We provide them with guidance and suggestions, but ultimately we supply the frame so they can construct the house the way they choose. So I think the answer there is that they all probably do it a little different. I think that the guidelines and the suggestions are to make sure that there's a good bonding between the superstructure and the frame, though they leave it up to the manufacturer, who ultimately is going to decide how they're going to make that attachment take place. So I'm assuming that's what the clear answer is. So they then provided me several bullet points, and I'm going to go over those. They said frames experience detachment from the walls or excessive flex when the following occur: excessive road abuse. Basically, towing down poorly maintained roads and trails can damage the superstructure of anything, including RVs and any other type of towable product. So I guess that means you got to be careful where you tow your RV and kind of be smart about it. If you have like an overland rated RV that is designed for crazy off-road trails, you probably don't have to be as concerned. But if you're hauling around big luxury boxes that are designed to essentially be mobile condos on the road, you probably want to avoid taking them to places that are super scenic but might be a heck of a rough ride getting there. Or a scenario where you're really going to have your RV suspension working at extreme angles to get where you want to go. Oftentimes with fifth wheels, it's pretty obvious. If you feel where you're going might cause your truck bed rail to make contact with the fifth wheel upper deck area, you probably shouldn't go there. The next bullet point was, water intrusion into the walls can cause delamination, rot, and structural failure, leading to possible detachment from the frame. When the body of the RV and frame aren't working in unison as designed, excessive frame movement can be experienced. And again, that just goes back to our other point. If you have damage to your sidewall, to your roof structure, to your front cap, and this piece right here is no longer one structural unit attached to your frame, you're going to have excessive frame flex because the box is no longer creating that rigid structure to the frame, and you're probably going to have damage to the interior parts of your frame, and it's something you're going to want to get fixed as soon as possible, because if you're asking too much of your frame because the box isn't carrying its part of the load, you're probably eventually going to cause frame damage. Next one is overloading. Overloading a section of the RV and not distributing your cargo evenly across the floor plan can cause isolated stress in specific areas of the floor plan, which can lead to house damage and ultimately frame damage. Huge battery systems, e-bikes, and other heavy equipment can quickly add up, causing overloading in these areas. So what that message essentially means is, if you have 3,000 pounds worth of cargo capacity like we have here with our RV, I'm not going to put all 3,000 pounds worth of cargo inside of my basement storage. I would assume, and actually the instruction manuals say, that you need to space it out and distribute that weight evenly across your floor plan. If you can't do that because maybe your floor plan doesn't give you storage options to do that, most people are just going to take it all and stuff it where they can fit it. I am guilty of that as well. I found extra space in my basement storage area. You guys saw the video on it. I moved a wall back about 3 feet and gave myself a ton of room to put big batteries, big inverters, and other equipment that weigh a lot. And I did it because I had the space for it. A lot of people reconsider adding stuff to their RV if they don't have space to accommodate it. And maybe that's the way we have to think now. We have to go, okay, well, if I have 3,000 pounds of cargo capacity, should I put it all in my basement storage? And if I do, what impact is that going to have up here, especially considering the fact that I have a washer and dryer up here, I have an Onan generator right here, I have my propane cans right here, and I have a 200-pound mattress inside of my RV. All of that adds a tremendous amount of weight to this front section of the RV. And from an engineering standpoint, from a structural standpoint, I don't necessarily know how comfortable I now feel asking just this front section to carry as much of the load as I'm demanding of it. It would be nice if floor plans did include more flexibility to give you cargo space in areas that were maybe a little closer to your axles. Maybe in areas that would not put so much of a demand on just one section. But I can definitely see why that would be a concern. Next bullet point, RV manufacturer defects regarding wall attachment. Once a wall becomes detached from the frame in the upper deck, it's no longer helping carry the load and provide structural rigidity to the overall superstructure. This can lead to excessive movement of the frame and eventually problems. So that goes back to the point we talked about earlier. If for some reason detachment occurs in this area right here, where the wall meets the upper deck, you're going to have excessive flex. It's just going to happen because the wall and the superstructure are no longer carrying their part of the deal, and it's all being transferred to the frame now, and the frame is now being stressed in areas that it's not supposed to be stressed in, or at least to the degree that it's being stressed. The next one, frame manufacturer defects. A defect in workmanship or material on the frame can also lead to excessive movement and problems. So this is where they're basically saying, you know what, if there's a problem with the frame and it's something we did or something that was a defect in how we built the frame, that could also have problems as well. So they're not just exclusively saying this is somebody else's fault. What they're basically saying is that if there is a problem and it's a result of a defect in how they manufactured the frame, that could also potentially cause frame flex. And then finally, usage of non-Lippert approved pin boxes. Using a Lippert approved pin box is critical to the proper performance of an RV frame. Approved products have been thoroughly and rigorously tested to limit the amount of potential damage they could cause to a frame. So that's a big one, right? I know there's so many folks who have their favorite pin box. I have mine. Mine's the Reese Goose box. At least as of now it is. You know, that could change at some point, but I love the Reese Goose box. It is approved by Lippert to use on their frame. Moride pin boxes, also approved by Lippert. Demco pin boxes. There are a lot of pin boxes that are approved to be used on Lippert frames. If you put a pin box that you may absolutely love because you like the design, you think that this is a really, really great solution, but it's not approved by Lippert to be used on their frame, which they're the experts in, you have to question whether or not you should really put that pin box on that frame. Because if there is structural damage and it's determined that that component contributed to it because it did not pass the testing that they subjected it to, well, you really can't blame the frame manufacturer or the RV manufacturer for a failure, right? If you've been warned, if you've been told, regardless of if you have a conspiracy theory about why they're working with one brand or another. You know, Moride is definitely not Lippert, and they produce a lot of products that go on Lippert equipment. But when it comes to their pin boxes, at least I know they're approved. They allow them to work on their frame. So I don't believe in the conspiracy that it's a brand thing, that we're just not letting you put your pin box because we don't like you or because you're not paying us enough. I truly believe that the testing that Reese has told me they had to go through to get their box approved to be used on a Lippert frame is the reason why. And that any manufacturer who's trying to sell you a product that needs to work on your RV needs to go through the proper testing. And in most cases, it's going to be the SAE testing to make sure that it can just withstand the craziness that it's going to be subjected to whenever you're towing an RV down the road. Anyways, after receiving this email with all of these talking points and everything I just went over, I got a follow-up email from Jared Lippert asking if he could talk to me. So we got on the phone, we discussed some of the talking points, we discussed what he sent me, and basically their passion around this whole topic and trying to get it addressed. And I asked him a very direct question. Can I come up to Indiana and can I interview your head engineer? And he said, absolutely, we have nothing to hide. So I will be traveling up to Elkhart, Indiana. I will be at Lippert's headquarters very soon, and I will be interviewing their head engineer and possibly some other folks, asking them the hard questions that you all wanted me to ask them. So that's going to be a future video coming up, along with an exclusive tour of their manufacturing facility, how they actually turn raw material into a completed RV frame that your RV is built upon. A lot of cool stuff coming up. If you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to this channel, give me a thumbs up so you don't miss those videos. Leave a comment below. I would love to know your thoughts, and perhaps if you have any other questions that I can ask them while I'm there. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up. We'll talk to you again very soon.